This is Jessica Taylor and David Brown interviewing Dr. Dorothy Cooke on July 15th, 2013 at 1:15 p.m. Dr. Cooke, can you please state your full name?
Dorothy Helena Cosby Cooke, with an E.
What is your date of birth, if you don't mind me asking?
January 8th, 1941.
Where were you born?
Here in Gloucester County.
Do you have any siblings?
One sister.
Mm-hmm.
She's about a year and a half older.
Uh-huh. What are your parents' names and occupations?
My mother's name is Paige Dedmond Cosby, and my father, who's now deceased, is Calvert Lucial Cosby.
Uh-huh.
And my mother did domestic work. When my dad was living, he used to work at the sawmill.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and he worked at the Evans, the airport here. And I'm not sure exactly what he did. They're working on large equipment, I think.
I know you've had many lives, but what is your occupation?
Retired educator now.
Okay. Where do you live in Gloucester County right now? What area?
In the Belroy area, near Walter Reed's birthplace, on Hickory Fork Road.
Is that where your parents lived?
I was born in Cappahosa, in the same community where the Moulton Center is, Gloucester Institute. And we lived around in that area. We moved to closer to the art community, and then we moved back to the Sassafras community, and then the Belroy community. And I ended up marrying and sort of getting permanent residence in the Belroy community. And my mother doesn't live very far from me. She's less than a mile down the road from me, half a country mile.
That's wonderful. What is your earliest memory of Main Street?
Very isolated to some degree. There were a few businesses there. When we came down to Main Street, which we call Gloucester Courthouse, we had a particular mission in mind. I recall going to the drugstore, and we'd get our groceries, some groceries down here that were, well, it was a Lee's Market, and then down a little further, there was a Safeway, and there was a Wallace and Gurley's, and the Morgan drugstore, which was near Wallace and Gurley's. So in the latter years, I think we did our marketing at Wallace and Gurley's, and then our drugstore business at Morgan's Drugstore, which was owned by Harvey Morgan's family.
Did you ever go to the one across the street?
Gray's, which is up this way. No, we always did our business with Morgan, that I can recall. We even did our business with Morgan when it was up the street opposite where Gray's is now. Do you know where that is?
Gray's was where Jessica's on Main is now, next to the...
Next to it. I think the building next to it was the pharmacist, next to Jessica's, I believe. And it might be, you might be right that that particular building was it, but it was right in that vicinity. And opposite the street where SunTrust Bank and the annex part now is where the drugstore was. And right next to that was a market. I was about to forget this. I think it was called Martin's. It was like a hardware store, lots of little, whatever you couldn't find anywhere else, you could find it there. And let's see, the post office at that time, I think, as I can recall, it first being located across the street where it's the Morgan building now. The post office was there. And of course the Court Circle, I always remember, because that was sort of unique coming around the Court Circle. And we used to park. My dad had a way, we lived sort of in an isolated area, out of the way from where there were a lot of folks. So Saturday, in addition to taking care of the business, it was like a time visiting out, just kind of looking around. So he would park, and I remember us parking in front of Morgan's drugstore at that time, and which was next to Martin's, and just sitting there a long time watching everybody coming, and the comings and the goings, and then taking care of their business.
Mm-hmm. as an older child or a teenager, where did you spend time recreationally?
There was a place for the time when prior to my doing a little bit of dating, there weren't a whole lot of places to go. But we did have a movie down on 17. There was a movie called the Rim Theater. And there was, over opposite that, the same person owned that, but it was called the Wagon Wheel. They used to have dances. We used to go there a lot. And a lot of our famous artists, like Clarence Carter, James Brown, got started there at the Wagon Wheel. They were the two primary places. And then I can recall when a movie came up in the area where the movie is now, that's near where the bowling alley is. Sometimes we would go there. And that was the extent of our recreation, but we were happy as could be, I guess. If we weren't, nobody told us we weren't happy, so.
Describe the atmosphere at the Wagon Wheel, if you don't mind.
Just a lot of fun, loud music, and just dancing, fun. And you know, I don't ever recall it being a fight. We just had good, clean fun. Wherein now, somewhere to go, I'd be skeptical of that for the young people or whatever now, because it looks like, I don't care how nice the place is, there's always somebody who's going to get out of line there, but it was always just fun. Crowded, very crowded, hot, you know, a whole lot of folk get in there and you're dancing. They had booths. I think it was primarily booths on each side of the room, and then the dance floor was in the center.
When you started dating, where did you go for that?
Same place.
Same place?
As a matter of fact, it probably started about the same time. Because as far as we didn't do, then what you got a group of girls now who kind of hang out, you know, they have a car and all. Because my first car was as a grown woman. And then my husband and I shared that together. And it was years after I'd been married before I had a car seat with just my name. So things are quite different now. We didn't get cars for our high school graduation or whatever as we did then. So there weren't a lot of youngsters in my neighborhood, so it wasn't like we had a hanging out crowd per se. Mm-hmm. So basically it was home, you know, there weren't a lot of places to go, but we were satisfied with being at home. Church, always went to church, starting way back since I guess maybe about 9 years old. And I've been involved in church all of my life. Look forward to that on Sunday, primarily Sunday.
Mm-hmm. What about the gas station? Do you remember anything about it?
There was a gas station. There was one in the courthouse square. The senior building is now. It was Hudson South. I think it's still senior. The senior center sets back a little bit. Then there's a building that's right on, but the other one's on the street too, but the other one's a little closer to the street. You know what I'm talking about? You can tell by looking at where the gas pumps were. Mm-hmm. I think that's my first recollection of gas station.
Do you remember Edge Hill service station specifically? The Texaco?
Oh yes, I remember that one. But I don't think we went there that much. I think it was Hudson South where we used to go all the time. It was right on Main Street. And my dad did most of the driving. My mom could drive, but that was convenient. So I guess we just always went there. I can't recall, you know, how when things changed, trying to think how we would have entered the Edge Hill station then, if it would have been a problem. We had to go up and come back and all of that. But we went to, you know, Hudson South as best as I can recall.
Absolutely. Did you want to ask something?
No, I'm just fascinated.
At your high school, you went to high school in Gloucester, right?
Right, T.C. Walker.
Okay. Did other students have cars? Did you notice anyone in particular that had one?
I don't recall any of the students having cars.
Mm-hmm.
Just out of the norm.
Absolutely. Did most people walk to school or take the bus?
Most took the bus. There were some in the community who walked to school. Mm-hmm. Now, as I can recall, I know once we got our license, if we needed to stay over in the afternoon, once my sister and I got our license, I think it was the same thing other students, the parents would allow them to drive the parents' car if we needed to stay to school, but just driving back and forth every day. We rode on the bus.
Did you notice, as far as students' parents were concerned, that there were parents that were early or late in getting a car?
No, I think most everybody had a car. Most of them, the majority.
Okay.
Because you almost needed a car to get around. Before that, it was a horse and buggy. My family never had a horse and buggy, but I can remember riding on a horse and buggy. My grandmother was someone in the community, and when we were in the Belroy community, and we'd walk up there, this lady, she'd drive a little horse and buggy, and we'd go down to Capahosic to, if you're going down to the Moulton Center, when you cross the bridge, if you're going from the Capahosic roadway, after you cross that rickety bridge, you notice that what looks like it was a store down in there. Well, there was a lot of activity down there. There was a gentleman named Bland who owned the store, and he sold groceries and everything and beer. And this particular lady, my grandmother's friend, she would always like to go down and get a little beer, But that was something you didn't let the young folk. I guess I wasn't even supposed to know, but I knew, they were going to get a little beer. Because one day, I remember her saying to, his name was Bland, she said, "Mr. Bland," she said, "Mr. Beer, give me a Bland." So she had a couple of beers too many then. But that's my recollection of riding, with the horse. Most of the other people had their cars. Not most, well, I guess the majority of them did have their cars. Mm-hmm. And the school bus, if I'm going to tell you a little bit about the school bus, I can recall we didn't have heat early on. And there was a lady named Verna Cooke who owned the buses. And she had a couple of young men that would drive. And she would heat, before she left home, of course, bottles of water or bricks and wrap them in towels or blankets. And when she'd get on the bus, she'd give them to us. And then she'd put this on your feet to keep your feet from getting warm. Or, put this on your hands or whatever. She had a special name she used to call us. Can't think of what it was right now. I don't know if it was Darling or not. And she couldn't drive, never drove anything, but she'd always be sitting on there, supervising her bus and the driver. At that time, you had the seats on the side, and then you also had seats in the center of the bus. You know anything about that? The seats on the side, those in the center, you were sitting, what is it like? Kind of like Subway. You know how the subway buses ride? That's how they were. And on each side, you'd have them by the back. You sit back to back, and you had them right down the center of the bus, and some on the outside. Wow. Yeah.
I had no idea. So as a child and a teenager, you're moving around a lot into the different communities in cars and buses and horses and buggies. Where are you meeting friends and boyfriends most of the time?
At school.
At school. Like 100% of the time?
100% of the time.
It may be an obvious question, but why is that? Is it a sense of community there, or is it just that?
Well, like in my case, in some communities you've got a lot of kids. That was not the case in my community. So you just didn't meet them, because when we went out of the community, for the most part, we'd be coming down here to the courthouse to do our little family business, and we just didn't meet anyone. The other possibility would have been church. Now, my husband the gentleman who ended up becoming my husband was in the same church. We were in the same church, but I was 5 years younger, and I'm sure he probably didn't give me a second look, and I can't recall paying him any attention in church. And even in high school, he was 5 years ahead of me. Tell you the truth, I'm not sure how we got together. If the truth be known.
Well, tell me about high school. What was that experience like for you?
Very positive, pleasant experience, because I've always enjoyed school. And, I always worked really hard in my classes. I paid attention. I'd get my homework when I got home, and I can recall my parents saying they did not have the fortune of finishing high school, even elementary school. My mom did graduate from 7th grade at Bethel School. I went to Bethel too. I started out at Bethel, which is one of the Rosenwald schools. And I went there through first half of 5th grade. And by that time, Mr. Walker had built the training school, T.C. Walker School. And all of the community schools at that point closed, and all the African Americans came to T.C. Walker.
What was that transition like for folks?
It was easy. I was a little afraid to start with because the teacher I had at Bethel was real mild, and the one that I knew I was going to have, because she was a principal at Bethel, and she was just kind of gruff and rough. So I was shaking a little bit in my boots, but oh my goodness. But because she seldom smiled, but it wasn't bad once we got there. It was something I knew I had to do. I couldn't run away. But it worked out fine, and then moved on up, through the grades. And because when you're limited, I think it helps when you're limited, and then you're not looking for a lot of things to do. Like some of our youngsters, unfortunately, I think there's so many things to do, so many places to go, they have access. The more choices we have, the more confusing it is. You see what happened this morning when we walked back. I said we had 3 rooms, and you said we can go in here. I said, no, wait a minute, let's check this other one out. It had been just one room, and we create that for ourselves. But the more choices, then you get to think, oh, you're bombarded. And so I think that's what some of our young people are experiencing. But with us in high school, it was fine. In most cases, the teachers knew our parents, and that wasn't a problem. Mm-hmm. So it worked out okay.
How was the experience at Bethel different for you than at T.C. Walker?
Well, one thing at Bethel, we had, it was either 2 or 3 classes going on at the same time in the one room. You had the same teacher. This could never be now. The same teacher, she had like 2 classes. She would teach like my class, and then she'd give us work, and then she'd go and work with the other class. Can you imagine that now? I had one group all together. I did a little substituting a few years back in adjacent county, just trying to get the one class settled. And we had broken down computer we had to use to check the roll. And by the time I'd get the computer operator to do the roll, then they were up too. Then I'd go back and settle them down. By the time I got them settled down, the computer had gone back to the default position. So this is one class, all of them together. But there was never any problem. we minded. We did what we needed to do because they weren't going to tolerate it, for one thing. We would have to stand in the corner. I remember standing in the corner one time until this day. You know how long ago that was, like 150 years ago. I'm not sure why, because I always really behaved myself. I think the same principal that I was afraid of was going to become my teacher. I think it was someone else that did something. She thought I was a part of it because I was close proximity. I really think that's what it was. And I don't think I had to stand in the corner very long, but that was the only time I can recall. But it was fun. At the high school, I don't ever recall, because I didn't give anyone any trouble, teachers or whatever. You go to your class and you do your work, and I always wanted to achieve, so that was not a problem. I did my little work and got rewarded accordingly.
Absolutely. So when you're in the commercial, either the district in Main Street or in general stores, kind of like the one that you were talking about earlier, where you went and got beer with your grandmother.
Just because I wasn't getting the beer.
You know what I mean?
That down here in the court, I said, was one place that was, it was kind of like Ben Franklin's. It was on the left. You know where Twice Told Tales used to be? On the opposite side of the street. I guess it was more almost opposite where the little gift shop used to be. It was, I think it was called the Bargain Store. And I forgot about on the court circle was Tucker's. I'm sure somebody, the lady you talked to this morning about told you about Tucker's. W.C. Tucker. I can remember that. That was on the circle as you were going back, going north on Main.
It's where the open lot is now, right on the circle.
We did a lot of our shopping there for no grocery items, but clothing items. Socks and underwear, things like that. Because I remember one time when I was like grown, was still there, and my grandmother needed, the older folk used to wear what they call snuggies. Have you heard of snuggies? And we went all to Newport News and West Point, they had Leggett's in West Point, looking for these snuggies, and they couldn't find them. And I thought, well, why not check Tucker's? And there they were. It was right here all the time. We found other places. And this other little store down the street, which I think it was called the Bargain House, they had some similar items like Tucker's had. No grocery items that I can recall. But I can recall getting hair curlers from the handkerchiefs. At that time, folk used handkerchiefs, not the tissues that we have now. Underclothes and things like that.
Were there any African American owned businesses on Main Street?
Yes. I can't give it a year now, but we did some research and I set up an exhibit quite a few years back. On that court circle, just about all of those businesses were owned by African Americans. And what is now Lemon Lane, going back in there. And I can sort of, at some point, I believe that information, I believe I left it in the museum. I need to check on it too. Somebody may have cleaned up now and tossed it. But there, back in there was a cleaners, a motel. There was a florist. You maybe Watkins Florist is probably the most recent one that was open there. Then right on the street, I think it was, what you call them, when you shoe horses and so on.
Blacksmith?
Yes. And then there was the same lady that lived in Woodville had a little boutique there around where Kearns Real Estate.
Mm-hmm.
There were two little houses there. One was the boutique, and then one of our doctors was there, Morris. And then as you continued around, or like if you were coming down, right where the Presbyterian church is, as soon as you passed that, to the right was Gardner's Shoe Shop.
Mm. And
then next to Gardner's Shoe Shop was African-American doctor, Turner. And I don't know in those next buildings there, but basically the whole circle some years back.
I guess except for the lawyer's row section.
That's what I can't remember what was in the lawyer's row section at the time, some of these other businesses. Of course, I remember some of the businesses I mentioned. I don't remember the blacksmith, but I remember the motel. Oh, and there was, I mentioned cleaners, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and which was also, a tailor. His name was Russell. And they were relatives too, Lemons and the Russells. Then there was a tea shop. I remember a tea room being opened up in that vicinity. That may have been my young adult years, tea room. But to answer your question, I can't remember exactly what was there. But I'm glad you brought that up because I'm going to go back and check and see if those materials are still there because I had left them in a file. Because we had, when the museum was in the circle in what is now, I think the tourism building,
Mm-hmm.
we used to set up a display every year. It started after we got a museum committee and so on for the county. And fortunately, we had the lady who was a close descendant of those persons that owned those businesses down in Lemon Circle. We had a program that Sunday and she talked about it, and the ownership and their relationship. And farther down the street, of course, you all may recall what is now Edge Hill. At one time, George Larimer owned that, okay.
We had a good discussion with him a few weeks ago.
Good.
He and his wife came by. I think it's his wife. The first time I met him.
Okay.
And very pleasant man.
We were high school classmates.
When he owned the station, what was it like?
It was just routine. I used to go to get my gas, and he had, I think, mechanic work on the side. I don't think I ever had any work done in the shop. I would get gas there.
In your young adult years, what was the relationship like between black and white store owners that sort of coexisted in the courthouse?
I wasn't close enough to it to observe anything in particular. I'm not aware of any problems.
Okay.
Never heard anybody talk about any problems that they had.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it was more folk just went on and did their business. Everybody minded their business and didn't have time. You were so busy struggling. This is my summation of it now, keeping your business going and all. We didn't have any problem there in that area.
It sounds like the number of businesses, African-American businesses, it was like a really interesting community where it's more than just the necessary things. It looked like there was opportunities to do different things and some entrepreneurial tendencies, if you will, between it being a hotel and a tea room and things like that. They really kind of stick out in your mind, but also kind of mark it as something very interesting.
Right. And unfortunately, there weren't family members. In some cases, there were family members, descendants, but who were interested enough to carry it on when those people kind of moved out of it for age, or if they died, or whatever.
Do you think that's kind of typical for the county? They mentioned in the newspaper a few years back the census had recorded there being, right around 5% of the population in Gloucester County was African American. When you were younger, do you remember the population being a larger percentage? And how have you seen the numbers of African Americans in this community and community by mean the entire county? How has that changed from when you were younger to where it is today?
I don't know how it has changed. I don't recall any figures, whether, what the percentage was.
Just your impression.
It was always in the minority, number-wise, as far as African Americans in the county. But now, like you find in the honeypot tree, there was during this Mr. T.C. Walker's time, and the date, I'm bad at dates, but a large percentage of African Americans own a large percentage of property in the county. That was cited in particular, which was, I'm sure, a part of Mr. Walker's, a part of his work was encouraging African Americans to buy land, build, and things like that. And a lot of people had followed through and had done that.
When we research at the courthouse, when we come across T.C. Walker's name in the index to grantors and grantees, it's like I think it's got to be 24 pages, and these are the long pages where he's involved in some kind of transaction. So there's probably 20 or 30 transactions per page, and he definitely encouraged and participated in and was trying to push towards that idea of property ownership being kind of an essential. Much like today, where this idea that property ownership is an elevation of one's status in the world, and it may not be the best decision for all of us, if you can't afford a property, but in that day and age, it looks like people definitely did their best to purchase a piece of property, and it's remarkable.
It is remarkable. It was, like the whole idea of home ownership, had real value. And he was saying, like, for African Americans, this is like, a step to freedom and independence and being on your own, and the value of that was continuously stressed. I knew him, as a matter of fact. I happened to join the church of which he was a member, Bethel. And as a little girl, I can recall him he was on the trustee ministry. And every Sunday he would stand up and say something. And I'm sure he was talking, because I don't remember exactly what he was saying. I know sometimes he'd get up, could hear the like not again. It didn't matter to him. He was going to say what he wanted to say anyway. But I'm sure he continued to stress by land or so on. And as he saw things that were problems in the community, he challenged the folk to do something about it, you know, don't just sit back and roll over and play dead. So I can recall him being there. His father was co-chair of the building committee that steered the construction of the sanctuary in which we now worship. That was 1889, that was dedicated, so see, the roots go back a long way there.
I'm going to let you guys continue to talk. My apologies.
Okay.
But I really wish I could stay more. But enjoy. And thank you again for taking the time. That means a lot to me personally.
You're very welcome.
Right.
Good luck to you in your project.
Thank you.
See you later.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
We'll be in touch.
Okay. I won't keep you much longer, I promise.
Okay. Sorry.
So I wanted to ask you about, you know, your preservation efforts at the Woodville School and at Moton Center. It seemed, I mean, I only heard a little bit from you, but it seemed really interesting, so.
It is interesting. I worked on various committees longer than I care to admit, trying to preserve the T.C. Walker Home Place house down on Main Street, which is boarded up. I'm sure someone has pointed that out to you. I worked on various committees down through the years. So this is sort of a continuation with a little different twist because Hampton University owns the Walker property, and we have not been successful to work out an arrangement with them for sale or lease or giveaway or whatever. So, because we wanted to really try to preserve Mr. Walker's home if we could. But with the Woodville, the contact there is Mr. Walker was involved in the building of schools here in the county, particularly the Rosenwald schools, and that was one of the Rosenwalds. And Mr. Walker always stressed education. So fortunately, now that we have, we maintain ownership for the Woodville School, the committee, well, it's a foundation board on which I serve, and we're trying to plan. We're going to be raising funds, of course, because we need money for that, and plan for restoration of that building, and to get some activities going there so that it can be like a focal point in the community, which will not only preserve the history and the legacy, but it will allow participation for some activities now for our young people and older folk as well.
Mm-hmm. It's an obvious question to ask, but I've actually heard a lot of different opinions on Mr. Walker, and I was wondering why in particular, what about T.C. Walker means so much to you?
Well, I suppose because I grew up watching him in the church. It was my first knowledge of him. And then the school was named T.C. Walker that I attended. I graduated in 1958. And then I knew his family, like his two daughters, who came back home. They were away at the time when he was active there. I was a little girl, but when I became grown, they both came back home. He lost a daughter to death some years earlier, and we worked very closely together. So that kinship, I think, and people like my husband used to be a driver for him, and everybody around knew him. So it's just a kind of, and when you see folk who have worked so hard to try to help others and to try to be an example, like a mentor for others, and because I, to some degree, try to do that, I always figure, you know, we all need to put our best foot forward and achieve and be instrumental in helping other people do things to become independent. And then I could kind of relate to that and have an appreciation for what he did. And, you know, I had the opportunity to visit the home when I, not during the time he was there that I can recall, but and the daughters were there. We used to have meetings there. And we had some really good times working in church together with the daughters. And now, of course, the history, reflects like his father and how long he was there, longevity and his dedication. Mm-hmm. So it kind of grew, I guess, with me.
Well, what is your vision for the future of Gloucester, and how can preservation play a role in that?
Gloucester's moving so fast, I can hardly keep up with it. It's hard for me when I pass and I see where so much development has taken place, and oftentimes I look back and say, now what was that like? And I find it difficult many times trying to remember what it was like before it was developed. Mm-hmm. It's moving a little fast, and I guess as you get older, sometimes you say, well, okay, we need to slow down a little bit. I'm not sure where we are now with respect to growth in the state, but I know we maintain the position, I think, of number one for growth in the state for a while. Where I envision us going, it's a lot of housing that's taking place in the county. A lot of people are moving in. As far as natives of the county, we see that. I think that population is, I don't have any statistics, but I think that population is swindling because there are folk, many whose roots are here. And if they let property to their children, many of them have not come back. There have been some who have come back, but many of them have not come back. And I've seen properties that have been auctioned off and whatever. And but I guess the biggest thing is you see the housing developments that are just constantly. And then with the new school, with the decision having been made to build a new school, I would hope that adequate research had gone into that in terms of a needs analysis, that we actually do need that new school, while at the same time the T.C. Walker School will no longer be used as a school per se. And then I don't know where we are now with the project, which was to be developed between Short Lane and coming out to not Hickory Fork Road, it's Belroy Road, and then backing up on, what's going to Hickory Fork? A huge development project which was supposed to be like a community in itself. Have you heard about that? This was some years back, and I think that was sort of halted in this development. But I think they came up with, there seemed to have been an alternate plan for development, but it was going to be having its own schools and like a little town. So like I said, I don't know. That was a little bit scary for some of us. And I don't mind growth, but sometimes it gets to be a bit much. I think one of the downsides for us, persons who were born here, is with the zoning laws, and I know you've got to have some structure, but it has been a real disadvantage for folk who have property and they want to split it up and give it to their children. There are so many restrictions with that a lot of people have suffered some hardship with that. Because I just know of a family who sold a piece of property, it was 6 acres, and with the zoning, and because I looked at the property and had been told, well, there's nothing, it's died on its own. There's nothing we can, you could really do there unless you were going to purchase horses. Used to be a time you figured 6 acres, you could split it. You got 6 children, or if you want to sell it. But you can't do that now. So those kinds of restrictions are not good. I'm thankful that I live where I'm not required to hook up to the county water system or the county sewer system. And depending on where you live in, you don't have a choice. When your choice is taken away, that's never usually a good thing. So growth, we continue to grow. I don't know, I just sort of sit back and have to buckle in for the ride. And I don't know, my years, I'm claiming 100, but got a few more years if I make it to 100. But I keep telling them with this T.C. Walker project, when it was just, we were working with T.C. Walker, I said, I'd love to see something happen in my lifetime But even with the Rosewell, now that we're working with Woodville, and I still say the same, that I'd like to see something happen in our lifetime. In our foundation, we've been coming up with some plans and all, but the key thing, it takes money to make it happen.
Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting to see how many people are going. That's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Because I was talking to someone just yesterday, and he said, before I donate, I said, well, we need money, we got to get started. And I told him the figure that we're using for the initial thing. He said, well, how did that figure come? He's an architect. He said, how did he come up with that? I said, the folk on the board who know those kinds of things have sort of analyzed it. And he said, well, okay, before I give anything, I'd have to see something going on, something happening there. And most people feel that way. But in order to make something happen, you got to have some money too to make it happen. So we'll see. Maybe we'll be some benefactor. Kind of get us moving along with that.
Absolutely. I'd like to hear any other anecdotes that you have about growing up here, being a young adult here, if you'd like to share them. But those are all the questions that I really have.
Okay. I think when I was growing up, I was kind of looking forward to thinking, like most people, to get away, go places and whatever. But Gloucester's all right. The only time I've been away from Gloucester is when I was in school. And I came back, I said my husband's from Gloucester, and we built in Gloucester. Settled down here, and I'm glad I'm here. When I see other places I travel to, and I enjoy it, and then I'm happy to get back to Gloucester, good old Gloucester. And I tell folk I'm a little partial to it, but I like it. I like the location, I like where I live. And so Gloucester hasn't been a problem for me at all.
Absolutely.
I can't think of anything in particular that probably later on I said, I could have shared this.
That's how it works. You can always call me back.
Yeah, okay. I doubt that it's going to be anything, real exciting or earth-shattering or whatever.